I've got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is Trump is not coming to save you. The good news is millions of Americans just got one step closer to understanding that the left-right paradigm is an illusion. Puppets reciting their good cop, bad cop script for the common end goal of their masters. If that's not enough to put a little skip in your step, I have reason to believe that number will only increase after we do a little rundown of everything Joe Biden has done and undone in his 2 short days in office. To begin, one of the first things Joe You Ain't Black If You Don't Vote For Me Biden did was fire a black man. He then signed off on a mask mandate for federal employees on federal property and followed that up by immediately violating his own order. When questioned about it, his press secretary had this to say.
Why weren't President Biden and all members of the Biden family masked at all times on federal lands last night if he signed an executive order that mandates masks on federal lands at all times?
I think, Steve, he was celebrating an evening of a historic day.
Oh, well, he was celebrating. Come on, man, give him a break. I honestly don't blame him, though. It's dangerous to put a mask on a 78-year-old man. Masks severely reduce your ability to get a good whiff of children. Now, after sampling several freshly shampooed heads, he caught wind of someone else violating the mask mandate on federal property. Who was it? It was the 5,000 troops he called in for his inauguration. So was he as forgiving with America's heroes as he was with himself? Of course he was. He banished them to a cold, dark parking garage, which I imagine, depending on the location, is one of Joe Biden's favorite places to lurk. I mean, hang out. Once he was done snubbing the very minorities his campaign was built on and rejoining the Paris climate hoax agreement, he moved on to breaking promises, beginning by promising to carry through on his plan to ban fracking, a plan that was consistently called a right-wing conspiracy theory.
I'm not banning fracking in Pennsylvania or anywhere else.
Then by discussing his strategy to ensure the COVID vaccine is mandatory across the country, after straight up saying, and I quote, "I don't think the COVID vaccine should be mandatory."
We should be talking about, depending on the continuation of the spread of the virus, we should be thinking about making it mandatory.
How could you enforce that?
Well, you couldn't. That's the problem. Just like you can't enforce measles. You can't come to school unless you have a measles shot. You know, you can't, but you can't say everyone has to do this.
As bad as this all seems, we haven't even scratched the surface yet. Following his broken promises, which only serve the purpose of manipulating people for votes, he did a huge solid for the environment by hiring Tom Vilsack, aka Mr. Monsanto, as his agriculture secretary. That's like hiring Jeffrey Epstein to head the Children's Bureau. That's like making Ronald McDonald the FDA commissioner. That's like making Cardi B the Secretary of Education.
You know what? If I kill somebody, I gotta go to jail. You gotta go to jail too.
Speaking of robbing men blind, Joe found the time to sneak in a plan to end toxic masculinity once and for all. How, you ask? By rebranding it as transgender rights. Biden issued an executive order to expand LGBTQ non-discrimination protections, essentially giving both genders sweeping rights to live as the opposite sex. So bad news for little girls who dreamed of being professional athletes, but great news for men who are looking for a legal loophole to crush women's skulls. So stunning. So brave. He then sprinkled in a promise to increase minimum wage to $15 per hour, which anyone with a brain knows will replace more humans in the workforce with machines, and make the disadvantaged virtually unemployable by increasing the competition for whatever jobs are left. Now finally, he ended his 2-day economic and societal killing spree with an interesting little twist. He took a page from his own playbook and started stealing Instagram followers? Yeah, that's right. The Biden administration has an Instagram page that's apparently filled with virtual hostages. I watched as this page climbed from 3 million to 5 million followers in under 48 hours. But hey, consent has never been a big issue for Joe. Now, I know it's been a rough couple of days and this is a lot of information to take in, but there is one thing Joe Biden did that calls for celebration. He rejoined the World Health Organization, who quickly and quietly updated their guidance for COVID testing. In this update, they claimed that PCR tests used at high amplification cycles are virtually meaningless, and that moving forward, COVID diagnoses should only be made in combination with a second confirmatory test and clinical presentation of symptoms. That means there's a very high probability that the asymptomatic cases they used to justify lockdowns for a year weren't even contagious. Scientists knew this. Doctors knew this. The experts that claim to provide us with truth and peer-reviewed research knew this. And they stared you in the face and lied about it anyway. If you still believe these people are being honest with you, answer me this. If they knew these tests had a high likelihood of producing false positives, why not require the second confirmatory test and observation of symptoms in the first place? Remember, the original goal for this lockdown was to slow the spread as to not overwhelm hospitals. It was never to keep every human being safe from viral infection. So why not be honest about the fact that hospitals are no busier than normal? Why not be honest about lumping deaths with COVID together with deaths from COVID?
There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem, some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that.
How many of these deaths of people who had 2 or more underlying conditions had a false positive due to this faulty diagnostic tool? We are not dealing with a pandemic. We are dealing with a virus no different than the thousands of viruses we have dealt with throughout our lives. The only difference is that now death has shifted from an unfortunate fact of life to a preventable tragedy that can only be stopped by forfeiting every last one of our God-given rights. So why is any of this a good thing? Well, because overnight our trusted experts became despicable liars. And liars create truth seekers.